Fear isn't just about jump scares and disturbing imagery. It's about the slow, creeping realization that the world you thought you knew is a lie. It's about the whispers in the dark, the things you see in the corner of your eye, the feeling that something is profoundly wrong. Silent Hill 3 doesn't just tap into these primal fears, it dissects them, lays them bare, and forces you to confront them in the most visceral, unsettling way imaginable. Reality becomes a fragile construct, easily peeled back to reveal the rot beneath. In Silent Hill 3, that rot takes shape, becomes tangible. It bleeds into our world, twisting the familiar into the grotesque, the mundane into the monstrous. Silent Hill 3 isn't just a game, it's an experience, a descent into the darkest recesses of the human psyche, where the lines between reality and nightmare blur, and the only certainty is dread. It's a masterpiece of atmosphere and a testament to the power of psychological horror. Journey with me through the twisted horrors of Silent Hill 3, exploring its treatment of a protagonist ahead of her time, through themes of maternal anxiety, corruption of religion, blurred realities, and how the game's music and sound design solidifies the game's world building. All these aspects amount to why years later, Silent Hill 3 still reigns supreme in the pantheon of horror titles. This is why, amidst the fog and the fear, Silent Hill 3 is a masterpiece of grotesque beauty. This is why it still haunts our dreams. Silent Hill 3 was released in 2003 for the Sony PlayStation 2 and developed by the Konami subsidiary Team Silent. Following the release of Silent Hill 2 in 2001, Team Silent wanted to expand upon the groundwork laid in its previous titles by creating an even more immersive experience for the player. While Silent Hill 2 focused on subtle psychological dread, the game was somewhat criticized at the time by fans in Japan due to its overly ambiguous story and less of a focus on horror than Silent Hill 1. Instead, Silent Hill 2 focused more on terror rather than horror, an important distinction that author Bernard Perrin highlights in his book Silent Hill: The Terror Engine. Perrin argues that horror is compared to an almost physical loathing, and its cause is always external and apparently material, while terror is identified with the more imaginative and subtle anticipatory dread. Silent Hill 2 focuses more on a terror from within, a visceral experience that is emotionally driven. Silent Hill 3 then would dial up the intensity with more graphic horror elements. There would be more blood, gore, and generally violent and shocking imagery. The game would incorporate more jump scares, keeping players on edge and building a more intense feeling of tension. While Silent Hill 2 was a standalone story, Silent Hill 3 aimed to tie back to the original game's lore and mythology, particularly concerning the cult of the Order. This would provide a sense of closure for long-time fans while also expanding the universe of Silent Hill. The themes Team Silent wished to explore in Silent Hill 3 would be much darker in tone and somewhat controversial. They wanted to explore more mature content and push the boundaries of what was considered acceptable in a video game. Themes of religious fanaticism, maternal horror, and mental illness would permeate through the game, all contained within environments that were immensely more detailed than its predecessor. Game writer Hiroyuki Owaku stated in a 2002 interview with IGN during E3 that, "We're trying to help players get into this world of fear. We want them to forget about the real world while they're playing the game." One of the key visual elements that would engulf the player would be the way the game's environments were seemingly alive, with walls and floors pulsing with textures resembling blood vessels. IGN evocatively described these effects as a microscopic view of capillaries under your skin, offering a striking impression of blood coursing through the walls around you. Game director Kazuhide Nakazawa explained to IGN that the idea here is to give the feeling that you've been swallowed up by this other world. When IGN asked what kind of horror scares Nakazawa, he stated, "It's not sudden surprise, like when someone jumps out behind you or something like that. It's more of a crawling kind of fear that grows on you." The use of the word crawling here solidifies the development team's desire to create a kind of horror that would slowly spread through the player over the course of the game. The constant shifting and blurring of boundaries would keep the player on edge, never knowing when the familiar will transform into the terrifying. This is something that Team Silent were passionate about implementing, and has fully realised to great effect in the game's final release. Team Silent also wanted to deliver a game with nuance and ambiguity that thematically drew influence from more refined works in the psychological horror genre, such as David Lynch and Stephen King. In short, Team Silent wanted to create a game that was not only scary, but also thought-provoking, emotionally resonant, and artistically significant. Game producer and sound designer Akira Yamaoka was similarly confident in the studio's final product and shared this collective sense of satisfaction. We're confident we've done a great job with our title and expressing the greatest horror, we believe, that's ever been made. While Team Silent are notoriously tight-lipped during development of their titles, their vision for the game and the themes they wanted to explore would revolve heavily around the game's protagonist, Heather Mason. They wanted to deliver the Silent Hill experience from a different perspective, focusing on themes of motherhood, family, and female agency. In a 2016 article in Vice, Jake Laverty wrote that, in Heather Mason, Silent Hill 3 boasted a fully three-dimensional female lead, neither a coquettish schoolgirl nor a gruff and troubled badass. Heather is a remarkably ordinary character. Her appearance is more like an actual person, rather than an idealized fantasy. She's sarcastic and confrontational, but there's a vulnerability to her as well.
Then don't say anything. I'm fine, so just get out of here and leave me alone already!
This emotional vulnerability adds a greater level of depth to Heather, which works to humanize her character while remaining tough and capable. She experiences fear, grief, and anger, allowing players to build a more empathetic connection to her struggle. This emotional journey is a key part of what makes Heather's character so compelling. She's not just a tough exterior, she has a complex inner life that the player gets glimpses of throughout the game. Unlike many horror game protagonists, she's neither a blank slate nor a passive victim. She's not afraid to speak her mind, and her sarcastic wit and dry humour provide moments of levity in the face of dread. There are many moments in the game where her inner monologue describing the horrific discoveries she encounters provides moments of dark humour that resonate with the player. Heather's character model is also remarkably well rendered. Her facial expressions and animations convey a wide range of emotions, a significant advancement for the time, allowing for more nuanced character interactions and making Heather a more believable and relatable protagonist. Heather has served as the basis for many essays regarding her depiction of womanhood, and her character offers a compelling case study for feminist themes in gaming, most notably her subversion of traditional female roles and her reclamation of agency in a narrative steeped in patriarchal horror. She defies the final girl stereotype prevalent in horror, but the last surviving character, typically a young woman, defeats the killer or monster.
We all go a little mad sometimes. Haven't you?
These characters usually fall into a gender stereotype where they are presented as pure or innocent, lack emotional depth, and exist purely to survive. Heather smashes these stereotypes by confronting the horrors of Silent Hill head-on, as she refuses to be defined by her family legacy and the expectations placed upon her.
What are you doing?
Dad.
This is how Silent Hill 3 delves deep into the complex and often unsettling terrain of maternal anxiety. In this regard, Heather's self-identity becomes a metaphor for these wider themes. Heather is in fact a reincarnation of Alessa Gillespie, the source of Silent Hill's horrors. Heather must confront this legacy, grappling with the fear that she might inherit the trauma of Alessa and become a similar vessel for destruction. Anxieties around motherhood can be associated with a loss of self, and Silent Hill 3 touches on this theme through Heather's necessity to gain independence and reclaim her identity. This all culminates in a physical conflict against the memory of Alessa, a boss battle towards the end of the game, in which Alessa takes the form of a mirrored version of Heather. This battle is an arduous struggle for the player, with Alessa reviving herself over and over again, signifying the perpetual cycle of the inherited turmoil and destiny that is now threatening to corrupt Heather. After the battle, a note from Alessa is found upon the floor. "It would be better for myself to die. After all, it's nothing to be afraid of. That child, that demon. When I think of the endless pain it will bring when it is birthed."
I'll so care for the soul of the girl whose life I have taken. God, I child, trembling with fear as I stare at death.
The game's focus on birth and creation explores the fear of the unborn and the anxieties surrounding the unknown potential of a child. These anxieties are amplified in Silent Hill 3, where the child in question is a potentially destructive god. The game's antagonist, Claudia, also embodies a twisted version of motherhood. She sees herself as a spiritual mother, seeking to use Heather as a surrogate to birth this new god. However, her maternal instincts are warped by religious fanaticism and a lust for power. She manipulates and abuses others in the name of her child, showcasing the potential for maternal love to become possessive and destructive. Claudia represents the fear of a mother's love turning toxic, smothering, or even violent. Silent Hill 3's monster designs also present themes of anxiety through a grotesque distortion of motherhood, representing the fear of the body becoming something alien and uncontrollable, a vessel for something terrifying. The distorted ambiguity in Silent Hill 3's monster designs have the power to shift and evolve depending on the individual player's experiences and interpretations. While I won't go into specific monster designs and what they may symbolize, one of the strongest aspects of these designs is their ambiguity. It's important to understand their broader connection to Heather's inner turmoil, particularly regarding pregnancy and motherhood. Silent Hill 3's art director Masahiro Ito was heavily inspired by the work of Hieronymus Bosch, a Dutch painter active during the Middle Ages. Bosch was known for his depictions of religious concepts, exploring macabre and twisted visions of hell. Bosch's imagery of tortured sinners suffering an eternal damnation seems to be consistent with late medieval literature. This ties into Silent Hill 3's religious themes and how the game uses distorted religious imagery and the actions of the Order to critique the dangers of religious fanaticism. While the game doesn't necessarily condemn religion itself, it does illustrate how faith can be twisted and weaponized by those seeking power and control. This is represented through the game's antagonist and leader of the Order, Claudia Wolf. Her zealotry embodies the dangers of religious fanaticism, as her unwavering belief in her own interpretation of God's will blinds her to the suffering she inflicts on others. She justifies her cruelty and manipulation by claiming to serve a higher purpose, demonstrating how fanaticism can lead to moral blindness and a complete disregard for human life. Bosch's influence on Ito is evident through these religious depictions, as both artists use ambiguity and distorted symbolism to showcase a profound sense of horror. While not confirmed by Ito, another artist that evidently inspired the monster designs of Silent Hill 3 is Francis Bacon. The renowned painter's distorted and unsettling depictions of the human form often explore themes of isolation, anxiety, and the human condition, which resonate with the psychological horror of Silent Hill. Bacon's paintings are characterized by their raw emotionality and their unflinching portrayal of the human body in distress. His figures are often contorted, fragmented, and seemingly trapped in a state of perpetual suffering. This sense of unease and psychological torment is something that Ito sought to capture in his monster designs. By combining these diverse influences, Ito created a truly unique and terrifying bestiary for Silent Hill 3. The monsters are not just obstacles to overcome, they are deeply symbolic representations of the game's themes and the characters' inner struggles. Another artist that has been cited as an inspiration to Silent Hill 3 is the film director David Lynch. The game's handling of parallel worlds shares some striking similarities with the dream logic and shifting realities often found in Lynch's work. Just like in his films Mulholland Drive or Lost Highway, the transitions between realities in Silent Hill 3 are often abrupt and disorientating, defying any sense of logical progression. One moment Heather is traversing a mundane shopping mall, the next she is plunged into a grotesque, nightmarish version of the same location, where the architecture twists into grotesque shapes. These shifts aren't telegraphed or explained, they simply happen, mirroring the way dreams can seamlessly blend different settings and scenarios, without any regard for spatial or temporal consistency. It's as if the very fabric of reality is fraying, allowing these alternate dimensions to bleed into one another, creating a sense of unease and instability. In essence, Silent Hill 3, like many of Lynch's films, creates a world that is both familiar and alien. Lynch often takes familiar settings, like a diner or a suburban street, and twists them into something unsettling and surreal. Take the diner scene from Mulholland Drive, for example. In this classic scene, Lynch builds tension and dread in a seemingly safe and comfortable environment, The sun is beaming through the diner window as two men discuss a recurring nightmare one of them is tormented by.
It's kind of embarrassing.
Go ahead.
I had a dream about this place.
The scene culminates in a jump scare, but what is truly terrifying is the dread leading up to this point. How Lynch builds suspense through dialogue, camera work, and the unsettling implication that dreams and reality are bleeding into one another leaves the audience questioning the nature of reality and the power of the subconscious. This scene from Lynch bears a striking resemblance to the opening of Silent Hill 3, where Heather wakes up from her own nightmare, perhaps a recurring one, in a familiar diner setting. The sun is beaming through the window here as well, but in the case of Silent Hill 3, the sun is depicted as burning red, more in line with the series' overall atmosphere of decay and unease. Both scenes expertly showcase the power of dreams and depict a blurring of lines between the familiarity of reality and the peculiarity of dreamscapes. Another way in which Silent Hill 3 draws from its cinematic inspirations is through the game's use of lighting and camera angles. The game engine used in Silent Hill 3 was an extremely efficient piece of tech for the time, and boasts some of the finest visuals available on the PlayStation 2. Nakazawa frames some incredible shots throughout the game. Take this low angle shot through the eerie spinning of a wheelchair in the basement of Brookhaven Hospital. The level of dread in this scene, as the spinning of the wheel comes to a screeching halt, completely destroyed me during my playthrough, to the point where I turned around and walked out the room. A common trait of horror games of this era, having a fixed camera angle in certain points of the game disables the ability to peek around the corner of a room or hallway, forcing the player to push through into the unknown. In Silent Hill 3, this fear of the unknown is exacerbated by the series' heavy use of fog. It obscures the environment, limiting the player's vision and creating a sense of claustrophobia and uncertainty. The game's use of lighting contributes to this fear as well, where throughout the majority of the game, player is only given a limited source of light, which creates a feeling of vulnerability. It also creates a sense of intimacy with the environment, as the player is forced to focus on the small area illuminated by their light. Bernard Perrin compares the cinematography and lighting found in Silent Hill 3 to the German expressionist movement of the early 20th century. Perrin contends that the mental state of the protagonists, the role played by the town, the blur effect of the fog, the lighting style, the high or low angle shots, all the prominent visual features of Silent Hill enable a comparison with the German expressionist aesthetic. Take Friedrich W. Murnau's 1922 classic Nosferatu, for example, where the monster is repeatedly obscured by its own shadow. The use of dynamic lighting and contrast found in Silent Hill 3 can be incredibly unsettling, where shadows can often make it seem like monsters are lurking just out of sight. During an interview with CVG, Owaku spoke about the similarities and differences between cinema and video games, stating that, "When we make a title, it is important that there is continuous terror, one after the other after the other. That is very important. However, it is also important that we give an oppressive feeling, and we achieve this by ensuring the character is always in a limited space, where they cannot really see anything." This feeling of relentless terror is felt throughout the game, where the only moments of respite found are a few cutscenes scattered in between terrifying traversals of the game's environments. Outside of these cutscenes, the player is constantly exploring a space with limited visibility through pokey hallways, pitch-black subways, and fog-filled streets. One of the most powerful moments in the game completely subverted my own expectations. Near the end of the game, the player is presented with a haunted house attraction inside an amusement park. The player, knowing that jump scares lie in wait, is given a rare opportunity to be forewarned of an experience. However, once the player enters, the use of lighting and camera angles immediately envelop the player with dread and turmoil. One of the biggest jump scares of the game occurs in this section, and is a shining example of how sound design, cinematography, and lighting can surprise and shock the player in a calculated and familiar setting. Akira Yamaoka's contributions to Silent Hill 3, and the series as a whole, transcend mere background music and sound effects. They are a masterclass in how sound can elevate a horror experience. Various tracks from the game's OST stir different emotions for the player and resonate with Heather's emotional journey. Take the opening song You're Not Here.
Blue sky to forever. The green grass blows in the wind, dancing.
The song encapsulates teenage angst and is reminiscent of popular emo music of the time, such as Jimmy Eat World and Dashboard Confessional, a musical movement that represented the complexities of navigating adolescence and finding your identity. This search for identity embodied in emo music is crucial to Silent Hill 3, where Heather is faced with forging her own identity in the face of a predetermined destiny. Yamaoka's score is an exemplar of juxtaposition. His music can sound incredibly raw at times, with industrial-sounding elements and distorted kick drums overlapping with beautiful piano melodies. Take the track Sickness Unto Foolish Death as an example. Here, Yamaoka uses distortion over the percussion before bringing in a beautifully delicate melody on a Fender Rhodes, an instrument synonymous with soft jazz compositions. This juxtaposition does well to reflect the parallel worlds aspect of the game. Just as the other world distorts familiar locations into grotesque versions of themselves, Yamaoka's music often contrasts familiar musical elements with jarring, unfamiliar sounds. The track Please Love Me Once More also reflects the sudden change of environments that occur in the game, where a beautiful sounding woodwind instrument is suddenly cut off and a long, drawn-out chord of dread is introduced. This creates a sense of unease and highlights the presence of something other within the familiar. Trip-hop is also a heavy influence on the game's OST, where the slow trudge of A Stray Child is reminiscent of the slow pace of a Massive Attack song. This spaced-out feeling of trip-hop perfectly represents the absurd visuals found within the game, such as the appearance of Robbie the Rabbit during the beginning of the game. His innocent appearance is juxtaposed against the dark, disturbing world of Silent Hill, often appearing stained with blood. Yamaoka's shifting of musical styles and genres also reflects Heather's abrupt shifts between the real world and the other world. One moment, you might be listening to a haunting, melancholic melody, reflecting the relative normalcy of Heather's everyday life. The next, you're plunged into a cacophony of industrial noise, distorted sounds, and unsettling rhythms, mirroring the nightmarish and surreal nature of the other world. This sudden shift in musical style disorientates the player, reflecting Heather's own disorientation as she moves between realities. The ambient soundscapes in Silent Hill 3 are also crucial for creating a sense of unease and disorientation. The subtle whispers, the distant cries, the creaking metal. All these sounds work to continually build tension and make the player feel like they're being watched. They also contribute to the game's dreamlike atmosphere, blurring the lines between reality and delusion, and make the player constantly question if that distant cry was in fact real. The game masterfully achieves this through the subtle nature of these occurrences. There are many moments of the game where you can hear the heavy bass of footsteps from the floors above you that are so incredibly mixed that I took my headphones off to check if they were in the game or in my actual home. The game's use of silence is also powerful in itself. Most of the time you are traversing the game world of Silent Hill 3, there is complete silence. This allows the sound effects and monster sounds to take center stage. It's a powerful tool for building tension, toying with the player's expectations, and forcibly cultivating a sense of hyper-awareness towards their surroundings. This use of silence can also create a powerful sense of isolation. It can make the player feel like they're completely alone, cut off from the world, a perfect emotional foil to Heather's search for identity and her visceral, agonizing search for self. Silent Hill 3 stands as a towering achievement in the horror genre, not simply for its scares, but for its masterful blend of psychological depth, thematic richness, and artistic execution. Heather Mason, a relatable and fiercely independent protagonist, subverts genre tropes, making her a compelling figure in a landscape often dominated by stereotypical characters. Her journey through Silent Hill is one of self-determination against a legacy of trauma and manipulation. The game's exploration of maternal anxieties, religious corruption, and the blurred lines between reality and nightmare resonates deeply, tapping into primal fears and social anxieties that remain relevant today. Masahiro Ito's grotesquely symbolic monster designs, inspired by body horror, religious iconography, and personal anxieties, are woven into the very fabric of the game. Silent Hill 3 taps into its cinematic and artistic influences to become something that continues to terrify and fascinate players today, cementing its place as a landmark in the horror genre and a testament to the power of interactive storytelling. Whilst not as much of an emotional gut punch as its predecessor, I walked away from Silent Hill 3 with a lingering feeling of dread. It impacted me with a profound sense of terror and constantly subverted my expectations. Silent Hill 3 has become my favourite horror game of all time, and its enduring impact lies in its ability to tap into universal themes, asserting itself as a powerful reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of the everyday.